Welcome to this live episode of The Tailgate. I'm Michelle Margaux, along SNY NFL insider Ralph Vacchiano, Steve Gelbs, and Bleacher Report's Connor Rogers. And Connor, we're going to start with you. From a fan perspective, did you want the Jets to win that game on Sunday, or was draft positioning more important to you?
I think at some point rooting for tanking is just got to stop, especially when you have a young core of players that they need to learn how to win football games together in the NFL, which is a lot different than college. And a lot of these guys coming out of different conferences and, plenty of them not from the SEC. They're used to winning at the college level and learn really quickly. It's just such a different ball game in the NFL. So, yeah, you would love Kayvon Thibodeau from Oregon or Aiden Hutchinson from Michigan. Those are special players. They're pass rushers. And the Jets are going to be in the market for that position every year under Robert Saleh, even though they already have paid a couple. They're going to be looking for that. But there's more than a two-player draft, Michelle, right? And at some point, you need to establish a culture that is not constantly losing football games over and over again. It wears on pros. I know some fans don't feel the same way. They want the better pick. But at the end of the day, winning does matter no matter what.
You know what's interesting? I feel about this exactly the opposite way I feel with the Giants, because they should just lose out and get the higher pick. But yeah, you're exactly right. The Jets are such a young team. The growth is important. The winning is important. Building a culture. I mean, just the peak that they gave inside the locker room through their social media accounts of how excited they were, how much it meant to them and to Robert Saleh is trying to build this program. For me, win as many games as you can. Hope that Seattle loses so that pick rises up through the charts. But, if the Jets end up with the 10th pick instead of the 3rd pick, I don't care at this point. They're still going to get two really good players in the draft.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in. I don't know if we have an order here. I'm new to the tailgate, so I'm gonna go when I see
we don't
fit.
care here. Do whatever you want.
Good, and I'm gonna take less than 30 seconds to bring in the Mets and make it all connect together. But I remember having a conversation with Don Mattingly at the end of this season, actually speaking about Buck Showalter when he was with the Yankees, when Mattingly was there. Obviously, the two of them together, and he said that one of the keys to really turning a culture around and changing an organization. And one of the things that Buck does so well is that he makes sure to bring in players that absolutely hate losing. Like at their core, losing is not acceptable. And that at some point when it comes to turning around the fortunes of an organization, and this obviously is about all sports, it has to be about making sure that losing is no longer acceptable. And I think that at times, that kind of complacency can seep in, especially over the last decade with the Jets, where there hasn't been necessarily this full kind of ground up reset that they have right now. It's clear where the direction is heading. It's clear that this coaching staff, a lot of the young players in this room are going to be here for the long haul. And so for this particular group, it is imperative to win as many games as possible. Draft positioning, be damned.
And by the way, Steve, we always want your opinion. So whenever you have one, please join in. Ralph, what was different about the way that Zach Wilson and the Jets offense operated this past Sunday compared to others?
They ran the ball really well, which, is something that's supposed to be the engine of their offense, right? It's what they want the whole scheme to be built around. So that was obviously important. If you can do that well, it opens up a lot of other things. There wasn't a ton of downfield passing necessarily, but they don't really have the receivers around Zach Wilson. But he still looked. We're setting the bar kind of low here, but he looks comfortable to me. He sounded that way after the game. He seemed more confident in where he was going with the ball. Which is everything for a young quarterback. The yards, the downfield throws, everything will come. Obviously, he had the big running play as well. But just if you can get him comfortable to the point where he drops back and knows what he's doing and is sure of it and is making the right read, everything else is going to flow from there. And I thought that was in some ways the best that he's looked.
Connor, have you gotten the sense that Zach is getting better at learning on the job and in kind of slowing that game down?
Absolutely. I mean, you could look at the numbers, Michelle. You could look at the tape. When you just break it down, coming back from the injury, right? He got to step aside and see some veteran guys run the offense. It wasn't just Mike White, but you got to see a little Josh Johnson. You got to see Joe Flacco. He's gotten to be around those guys. And he's starting to understand what he can and can't get away with at this level. And at BYU, the competition he played against, he can get away with almost everything. And I think it's one of those things where, you need to learn it in real game reps. Yeah, you can have training camp, you can have scrimmages, you can practice with other teams, but there's nothing like real game reps, especially in the CBA, where the live contact they get to do in practice is really minimal at this point. So I think you're seeing it translate for Zac. The turnovers are down, number one. The risk-taking is absolutely down. And now you're starting to see the body language. He looks more loose. He looks more comfortable. He's going through first read's not there. Okay, second read, ball's got to be out. You're not throwing guys when they break open, but more trying to throw guys open on the play, anticipate some throws. And like Ralph said, didn't really have to do a lot in this game. This is an offense that's going to be run first when they are at their best. That's good for any quarterback in the league. That's what a lot of good football teams do. But the plays where he is making conversions, and even the ones he's not, like the Jeff Smith drop on third down that was right in his hands, that's film that you can take away. That's not in the box score and say, okay, he's seeing it, he's comfortable, and most importantly, he's a little bit more confident than he was earlier in the season.
Steve, obviously ending on a high note is very important for Jets fans and Zach Wilson and for the team in general. How can Wilson finish on a high note to make Jets fans just feel confident heading into the offseason and not be miserable all offseason?
Well, I don't know about that.
Yeah,
I don't know if there's a way to avoid that at this point. But what I will say is that I don't think there's anything, if I'm being honest, I don't think there's anything that Zach Wilson can do over the next 2 weeks that will make Jets fans go out and say, well, no doubt he's the guy. They found the one to replace Joe Namath. I mean, there's no way that he can do that, barring going out and, throwing for 400 yards and 3 touchdowns both games against the Bucs and the Bills and leading the Jets to extremely unlikely victories. I think what you want to see from Zach is just the continued small steps forward. There have been far too many, either steps back or far too much stagnation at times this year, I think, for Zach. I also think that him getting injured, while in the long run, it probably, as Connor was pointing to, it was a great thing for him personally. In terms of fan perception, I think the honeymoon ended a lot quicker than it normally would have for the second overall pick. You had Mike White come in, do what he did. You had Josh Johnson come in, hadn't played a snap in the NFL since 2018, and do what he did. You had Joe Flacco come in, not know the offense, do what he did. And that Jets offense wasn't just good. It was by far the best offense in the NFL in the time period that Zach was gone. So then Zach comes back, it regresses, and you say, well, what's the common denominator there? It's Zach. And I think that kind of expedited the questioning in fans' minds. But that being said, I do think that he has looked better over the last number of weeks. I thought this week, to Ralph's point, was the best that he has looked just in terms of decisiveness. Even the runs, that 52-yard run is not something that you're going to expect to see from Zach Wilson very often. But there had been so many times this year where that lane was open for him. And for whatever reason, it was a stutter step. He started, he stopped. He just didn't seem confident. And so just the fact that he was able to step up in the pocket and go, I thought that was a good sign. The fact that he hasn't thrown an interception in the last 3 games, I think that's a good sign. The fact that he's not holding on to the ball as long, he's not running back, 10, 20 yards trying to make something happen. He'll throw the ball away occasionally. That's a good sign. So for me, all I'm looking to see out of Zach Wilson is just keep playing within the offense, keep playing smart, use your athleticism when the time calls for it. Don't make mistakes. And then go into this offseason having that rookie gauntlet under your belt, feeling pretty good about how it landed, and then showing everybody next year truly why you were picked number 2. But in terms of Jets fans, I think it's going to take much more than these last 2 games for them to feel confident.
You know what, though? It shouldn't take all that much when you think about it, because they haven't had much for so long. And this goes for the players, too. I think back to what I guess are now the dark ages when there was some winning in New York football. When Eli Manning was a rookie, he was pretty terrible for most of his rookie season. The big reason everybody had for optimism was the final game of the season. They played the Dallas Cowboys. The last drive of the game, he drove them down the field, and he had this famous audible call, right? They called a pass play from the 1-yard line. He saw something in the defense. He called an audible, handed it to Tiki Barber, and they scored a touchdown and won the game. The fact that he was able to make that audible just gave me like 100 stories to write in the offseason and raves from Giants players and coaches about that's when it clicked in. This guy finally got it. And, you could just see the confidence that everybody suddenly had in him heading into the next year. So I think, if he does anything that grabs your attention the last couple of weeks, of, a big throw, a big drive in a key spot, a run like that, something, it's just something to hold on to that, if you're a Jets fan, you've got to start having a little hope and optimism for the future.
It is, But I will caution, you're talking about Giants fans versus Jets fans, and Giants fans about 2 decades ago, not Giants fans right now.
Good point, yes.
And speaking from experience, before I took on this very impartial hosting role, and I don't have a horse in the race, right? I was the Jets fan sitting in the nosebleeds for the last 3 decades, expecting the worst and being surprised by the best. And so I just think from Jets fans will be ecstatic if he does something spectacular over the next 2 weeks. I think Jets fans were ecstatic this week against the Jaguars after that 52-yard play and throwing for 102 yards, but just not seeming out of place. But I think there will be, just personally, I think there will be significantly more questions in Jets fans' minds than there might be in a Giants fan's mind with Eli Manning, 15, 20 years ago.
There is a little bit that they're kind of happy being miserable. I kind of get that.
It's an issue. Connor, how far has this coaching, the team has been all over the place all season, okay? But how far has this coaching staff come? Fans were calling for Mike LaFleur's head early in the season. Then on Sunday, they performed well. They didn't have a head coach, and they were without 20 players who were on the COVID list.
Yeah, the offensive coordinator is an easy target no matter where you are. And that's been a Jets fan tradition as long as I've been alive. We can rip off 15 names the last how many years where that guy has had the target on him. But for LaFleur, now it's the opposite. He's the guy that I think people feel the best about with this staff. And everyone loves Robert Saleh, right? There's no doubt the defense has underperformed. They haven't been good enough. You can make the excuses you want. They're young, they're injured. But at the end of the day, he's a very smart defensive coach. I know that for a fact. His track record speaks for itself. It's got to improve next year. And I think it will with more talent and more health, hopefully, and more experience of being the guy. And that goes into Jeff Ulbrich as well. But the most important thing is the growth LaFleur has seen from a variety of reasons. Number one, first-time play caller. Let's not forget that. It's the first time where he's been given the keys to developing a quarterback with the number 2 overall pick. That's your guy. And now that he's up in the booth, you've noticed a gigantic difference of being 1 or 2 steps ahead. There's just times that situational awareness where the Jets are in a totally different place than they were those first couple of weeks of the season, where he felt like he had to be down on the sideline with Zach Wilson. Everybody understands that. They've made some additions to their staff that has allowed him to go up to the booth, and you're going, okay, this is a guy that sees it. This is a guy that understands what the defense is throwing at them, and he can be not 1 or 2 plays ahead, but maybe 3 or 4 plays ahead. The early scripts have been really good since Zach Wilson has been back from injury. It looks like they are doing some of their best work with their first or second drive of the game. I think that's a very positive sign because that's how the best guys in the NFL do it, whether it's Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, obviously Josh McDaniels and Bill Belichick for a long time. That opening script really dictates the kind of game you're going to play for the next couple of quarters. So I think LaFleur's been the most promising part of this staff where you look at, with Adam Gase, nobody ever knew what he wanted. They didn't know if they wanted to be a 12 personnel team, a heavy tight end running back team, or an empty team, or a fast team, or a physical team. I think with LaFleur, there's an identity there with that zone running offense and play action heavy passing attack where you go into free agency, you go into the draft and you say, this is who we are. This is who we want to be. And for the guys in the building, the scouts, even Joe Douglas, they're going, okay, we know how to do our jobs. We're going to get you the pieces, and we think you can make them work once we deliver them to you.
Steve, what do you think about all that?
I couldn't agree more with Connor. And I think, this is on the flip side, right, of what Zach Wilson suffered from. For Mike LaFleur, Zach Wilson getting injured was the greatest thing ever in terms of fan perception because the first month of the season, everybody was blaming Mike LaFleur. It looked like Mike LaFleur had no idea what he was doing. He was in over his head, wasn't, had no ability to call the plays. And then all of a sudden Zach goes down and Mike White looks like a Hall of Famer. And all of a sudden you're saying, well, the system, you just plug and play. It's the system. And so I think that I couldn't say it any better than Connor. I think he is the most promising part of this staff. And if you look at the Jets offense, they're really in a very short amount of time, they're really not that far away. For years and years and years, it was always about the offense. Even when they were losing, it was more about the way they were losing even than the losses sometimes. It's like almost unwatchable football in a league that is so exciting and so electric. And now you're seeing that with the Jets, and you're seeing the draft pay off this year with Elijah Vera Tucker and Michael Carter, who's been by far my favorite guy to watch this season, and Elijah Moore. And the lines look, there's just been a lot of great things that have happened with this offense. And I think going into next year, you look at they need a legitimate tight end. I mean, you have to have a legitimate tight end in the NFL. They need to get a legitimate tight end. Probably need one more weapon on the outside, one more receiver, and maybe an offensive lineman. But after that, I mean, you're pretty good to go, and that's pretty remarkable. And I think that talent combined with what Mike LaFleur has done with it, it's a very, very encouraging sign for this organization moving forward.
Yeah, I do agree that this is, with the 2 first-round draft picks they have, all the draft picks they've got, all the cap room they have, this could end up being a quicker fix than a lot of people think, or that their play this season would indicate. By the way, a little breaking news for you guys: the Jets play the Bucs this Sunday. Bucs head coach Bruce Arians has tested positive for COVID-19. He might be out Sunday. They won't, however, be handing the reins to ex-Jets coach Todd Bowles, his defensive coordinator, which would have been a nice, fun, juicy storyline for Sunday.
Wow, Ralph, you heard it here first. Thank you. MVP of the broadcast right now.
We're here, so I may as well, be useful.
Well, good. Thanks, Ralph. One person that we did not expect to be talking about all season was Braxton Berrios. Connor, how much of a priority is it for the Jets to bring him back this upcoming season?
I think for a lot of reasons, Michelle, right? Because the average fan that, might not even really care about the special teams guy or the fifth receiver or anything like that, you do need to, and they did this with John Franklin Myers earlier in the year, so let's be fair to Joe Douglas, but at some point you need to establish that guys that prove their worth, buy in, do everything you ask of them and beyond, because Braxton Berrios was really the return man on this team. And then the 5th or 6th option coming into camp at best, that might even be rich calling him the 5th or 6th best option. And he's filled in and done everything and caught everything. And he's a really smart guy that they feel good about throwing the whole playbook at with his routes. So I think you need to reward those guys. I'm not saying go pay your special teams player and backup slot guy or whatever he may be $8 to $10 million a year, but you need to find common ground, reward those guys. And special teams matters. Nobody cares about the punt returner until that punt returner is muffing every punt, calling fair catch inside the 10-yard line, very dumb things. And Braxton Berrios is a nearly perfect player on special teams. He doesn't make mistakes, and he can break the big play. And honestly, the Jets aren't a good enough team to go win games without getting a little help somewhere. And his return game has quietly been a huge part of either their wins or their point production this last month or so. So I think you got to find common ground and get a deal done with him. Crowder's money is off the books. So if you're saying, okay, they have too much at the slot, that's not true. Crowder's money is off the books. Keelan Cole's money is off the books. There's room to add some budget to that wide receiver room. And of course, what they love about him is that he does more than just play wide receiver.
Steve, we were not expecting to talk about Braxton Berrios, but one person that we were expecting to talk about all season was Mekhi Becton, and barring some sort of miracle, he's not going to be back in the final 2 games. So how do you assess the future of the Jets offensive line?
Now, if you would have told me before this season that Mekhi Becton would get injured week 1, be out for the entire season, I would have said it's a complete disaster. I mean, Zach Wilson's going to have, whiplash by week 2, and he's never going to recover. I mean, it was that bad. The only thing that I looked forward to in terms of the offensive line this year was that left side between him and Elijah Vera Tucker. And I think what happened, nobody really saw it coming, but the line has been more than adequate. And George Fant has all of a sudden made it a conversation as to whether or not Mekhi Becton should even be that left tackle when he comes back next season. Should you move Mekhi Becton to the right side? And so, for me, as bad as it is that your top pick from a season ago, a guy who, when he's healthy and when he was healthy last year, looked like a bona fide star, that he was out for the entire season, I actually think that it gives you a little bit of comfort now that if he can't stay healthy, they're going to be okay. And they've got enough depth there. And so you want to see him back. You want to see him stay on the field. But at this point, it's a big question mark whether or not he's going to be able to stay healthy moving forward. That was the issue last year as well, injuries. And so if he's back, if he's healthy, they're all the better for it. They're going to be a really, really, really good offensive line with him. If he's not, though, they're going to be okay. And that's something that nobody would have said before this season. It would have been viewed as a huge setback, not just for this year, but for the rebuild in its entirety. And it isn't right now.
Steve, it's interesting you talk about his fit in the offensive line, because I've heard scouts throughout the year say to me that he's not a fit for that offensive line scheme, that a guy that big who's built for power, he's got nimble enough feet for a guy that size, but that's not the kind of guy you want in a wide zone blocking scheme. You want a guy who's a little bit more athletic, who can get outside and move faster. Now, nobody's saying that he can't do that, and he wouldn't have done that if he had been given the chance. But, you're right. A lot of people are not surprised that line started looking a little bit better when he wasn't there. And there's questions about whether, they should keep him as their left tackle going forward, or, once he's healthy, maybe think about trading him, going in another direction. I'm not enough of an offensive line expert to know, but there are definitely some scouts that are wondering.
And what kind of message do you send the team too when George Fant has done a marvelous job this year on the left side? He's a better left tackle than right tackle. Let's make that clear. They came into the year, they started him at right tackle. Quite frankly, in the short stint there, he was not great, and he's been really good at left tackle. What message are you sending the team if you either cut George Fant, which who cares about the $10 million? The Jets are going to have a ton of cap space. Stop getting caught up in trying to cut corners and save money everywhere. I would go into camp next year, and like you said, Ralph, scheme fit, George Fant is perfect, right? The concerns about Becton do not exist with Fant, and I would go into camp next year and start Fant on the left side. Becton played right tackle in college as well. Morgan Moses is a free agent. I have no problem going into camp next year and saying, we're going to play Becton on the right side. We're going to balance this, right? We know ABT has power. We know Becton has power. With Fant, you're getting a little bit more finesse kind of play. We're going to balance our rushing attack on each side. Maybe you can bring back Moses. That's going to be a different conversation, but I have a very hard time just saying Becton walks back into left tackle and George Fant becomes an afterthought.
And no matter what you do, though, I think it is clear that you have to have a viable backup in case he goes down.
Always.
I mean, you just can't rely on him at this point. Until he proves that he can stay on the field, you have to have somebody ready to go in case he doesn't.
Steve, let's talk about the defense a little bit. They got hit hard by injuries before the season even started, continued to lose players throughout the season. Which holes on defense do you think most need to be addressed in the offseason?
All of them. Can I do that?
Yeah.
Where it's one of these things where you can think about it and you can really make an argument at almost every position. I mean, they're going to need safety help. I think the cornerback group has been much better than anybody expected, but you still need a bona fide number one corner. Definitely need some help with the linebackers, and you're going to need to at least reinforce that defensive line. You hope Carl Lawson can come back and give you that edge rushing presence, but it's an Achilles. I mean, you don't know how long it's going to take to ramp back up in that regard. So I think, if I'm the Jets, I don't necessarily go into this offseason or this draft and say, like, I have to go out and draft this edge rusher. I have to go out and draft. I go out and I draft the best defensive players that are available because there really isn't a piece of this defense where you say, no, they're set there. They're good to go. Don't touch it.
Connor and then Ralph, which holes do you think the Jets should be filling via trade/free agency versus the draft?
I think Steve nailed it where the answer is as many as you can, right? Don't go into the draft, cornering yourself all the time. And they kind of did that in 2020 where we knew they were going to take a tackle at 11. And I was the guy sitting there going, that's a bold strategy. There's no guarantee that one falls there. And both Tristan Wirfs and Mekhi Becton did. And it's been up and down for Becton. As great as he is on the field, he's hurt. But it's hard to keep doing that. You really need to do yourself favors. If you have the cap room, spend it. And they will. I think this is a team that's going to spend on safety because you got to be reliable on the back end. They did make a really good effort to bring back Marcus May before he got hurt. They wanted him here for a long time. And his agent and him liked the idea of the external market or somewhere else better. And unfortunately, Marcus got hurt. I think that is not going to be an option for the Jets. I think they go externally for safety, and there's a good safety class. And if I know anything about Robert Saleh, is it's pass rushers again, then everything else. So it's a good edge class. It's a pretty good linebacker class. So you have the draft to lean on there with 4 picks in the top 40. There's names across the board at that spot. But like Steve said, you got to go and knock off as many starter holes as you can in free agency and, of course, trade market as well. Something they have not explored enough for players. They've done it for picks. Now you got to think about winning and get the players. So, but just knowing Saleh, he'll care about pass rushers many times before anything else, not cornerback.
Unless there's a high-end guard or tackle that shakes free, and then I could see them maybe spending the money on that. I would focus all my free agent money on the defensive side of the ball. I've said this for years. The free agent track record with receivers, with running backs, tight ends, it's really spotty because those are young, fresh-legged positions, and there's always good guys coming out of the draft. If you can find a Michael Carter in the 4th round, an Elijah Moore in the 2nd round, it just tells you that there's good guys who could be immediately productive, especially with the Jets having that many high picks. So I would say they need another receiver, but there's going to be really good ones in the draft, even if they wait till the 2nd round. But I would focus my money. I'd want a veteran in that secondary. A veteran safety would be preferable, but if it has to be a veteran corner, that's fine too. And a pass rusher. I don't know. This is going to depend a little bit on where they end up picking, because I believe they could still get into that top 3, and maybe they get one of those 2 pass rushers from Oregon or from Michigan. But if they're not in that position, then get the best pass rusher on the market and put him opposite Carl Lawson. And all of a sudden your defense looks dramatically different. So, but if they're sitting there 1 or 2, they could probably fill that need in the draft. But to me, most of the money should go towards the defensive side. You can really build that up pretty quickly.
Steve, your opinion?
I mean, I agree. I just, what I find so funny is that forever. I mean, I remember talking about this on draft night. I might have talked about it with you, Connor, on draft night. Definitely with Ralph, though. Like, it's always been they're picking defense. Defense. Can someone focus on the offense? And then it's like they spend a little bit of time in free agency and obviously focus heavily on offense in the draft. And all of a sudden, it's like, man, the offense is pretty set. I mean, it's a very strange thing how this has happened in 1 year. But I agree. I think that they need to spend as much capital, draft, trade, free agency on the defense. The defense has been a disaster this year. And you can point to the injuries for sure. But even with the injuries, it's been worse than it probably should be. And I also agree with Connor. You look at what Robert Saleh did in San Francisco. When this defense was at its best, it was just because that defensive line was absolutely mauling people. It doesn't matter who's in the secondary if the quarterback has 3 seconds to get the ball out of his hands. So I think that that's always going to be an area of need, even though you could probably say that when healthy, that's the strength of this defense right now. You still need to reinforce it and bring somebody else in, a couple players probably, and I think that's exactly what they're going to do.
And the other thing to be careful of is they're going to have, I think it could be up to like $60 million in free agency, and Joe Douglas has been a master of this so far. You don't need to even come close to spending it all. You can spend it on your own players, on Quinnen Williams, get him locked up to a long-term deal, bring back Foley Fatukasi. You're going to have a lot of players like we're in the John Franklin Myers area that are, maybe not yet due for the big free agent contract, but are starting to earn it. You want to see them start to lock up some of their own good players long-term. So if they sit back and they hold 30 million of that cap room, all the better, because then if they got players that are worth it, they can pay them down the line.
You'd rather do that than go out and spend in day 1 of free agency on Jared Davis.
Exactly.
Truly, that's what you'd rather do.
Well, Connor, Steve, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining the Tailgate. That's going to do it for this live edition of the Tailgate. For Ralph Vacchiano, Steve Gelbs, and Connor Rogers, I'm Michelle Margaux, and we will see you next week / next year in 2022.